It's Monday, August 29th. There's a lot of things crossed out, but what's left describes a lot of lines being crossed. We start here. You've heard about the redactions, but what was found in the Mar-a-Lago affidavit?
We have a serious national security threat right now.
We'll ask a former federal prosecutor what she sees in the investigation of the former president's house. Can interest rates be raised too high? The Fed says, buckle up, you're about to find out.
The Fed has made pretty clear that they're going to remain aggressive and keep raising interest rates.
What this debate means for money and for your job. We took a giant leap as mankind, but we haven't taken that many steps since.
That capsule will someday be able to take humans to the moon and then stay there.
Artemis prepares to blast off, hoping to change the space race forever. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. Pretty much every person who works in the federal court system and every journalist that covers the federal court system has a membership to this online system called Pacer. It's how you look up cases. Well, by 12 noon on Friday, Pacer was running real slow. Everyone was on it because this was the moment the U.S. government was supposed to be unveiling the affidavit that was originally presented to a judge to get a search warrant of Mar-a-Lago. A judge signed off on the raid of former President Trump's house. Well, this affidavit was the reason, and at long last, it was released.
Though heavily redacted, the newly released affidavit revealing new details about what evidence the government had that convinced a federal judge to sign off on a search of former President Trump's residence.
Experts figured a lot would be blacked out. Well, that's what happened. Of nearly 40 pages, a little over half of them were legible. The other half were full of black lines or even black blocks where presumably pictures or diagrams would be. So we wanted to start off this week by asking, if this thing did not look like a ton to the layman, what would a federal prosecutor be looking for if they came across it? Well, lucky for us, we got one joining us this morning. Mary McCord is a former federal prosecutor. She is now the executive director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection at Georgetown Law. Mary, so first off, just when you're looking at this, I see bars all over the place. What do you see?
Well, first off, there's several pages at the beginning that are not redacted. And other than the very beginning, which is specific to this particular search warrant of Mar-a-Lago, indicating what the investigation was opened into, other than that, there's a lot of fairly standard language that would be in any type of warrant in a case involving the mishandling of classified information. Then you start to see the blacked out portions.
In a memo, the Justice Department explaining those heavy redactions, writing, the government has well-founded concerns that steps may be taken to frustrate or otherwise interfere with this investigation if facts in the affidavit were prematurely disclosed.
And that's because a warrant, in order to establish probable cause, has got to provide the court with the evidence that it has amassed so far. So that would mean the information it has obtained from civilian witnesses, including naming those witnesses. It would talk about investigative steps that have been taken so far.
And it's not just an obstruction of justice charge. It's exactly what actions were taken to thwart this investigation, to thwart getting back those documents.
And, what those investigative steps have shown with respect to the three crimes mentioned, right, which are mishandling of national defense information, obstruction of justice, and also the unlawful retention of presidential records.
The document is heavily redacted and reveals that well before the search, Trump had already been found to have taken highly classified information. That material found in 15 boxes that Trump's team turned over to the National Archives in January.
Everything that's blacked out is basically the good stuff, the stuff that is actually showing what the department has done so far that would what leads them to believe and would lead the judge to believe, there's evidence of these crimes likely to be found here.
So was there anything there that was useful? If the good stuff is all the stuff that was blacked out, was there anything there that you learned that you wouldn't have known already that you could take away with you?
I didn't know that any of the documents had what appeared to be Donald Trump's handwriting on them. So that will be interesting to ultimately learn what that means. Of course, those are documents in the original 15 boxes, not on what was just seized. I think it was very revealing when toward the end, I think in the conclusion of the affidavit, it made very clear that they're still trying to determine potential other criminal confederates.
So anyone involved in the process of moving these documents, storing these documents is definitely and should be concerned.
That doesn't really surprise me to see, but still there it was, right in black and white. And then the thing that I do think is interesting, important for people to understand, because there's been a lot of talk from Donald Trump and from his surrogates about how he had the power to declassify anything he wanted to. He had a standing declassification order, or he at least had declassified everything that is in these boxes. Well, that was presented to the judge in the unredacted portions of the affidavit, and it referenced a letter from his own attorneys to the Department of Justice making that point to the department, not like the department doesn't know that, and saying, please make sure you submit this letter to any judge who's ruling on any investigative step. What that means is the judge had this argument in front of him when he decided, I'm still signing this warrant. I think that speaks to the fact that that's not really a credible defense to this. It's not a reason not to have seized this information.
Hey, and I should mention, I introduced you as a former federal prosecutor. You're also the acting assistant attorney general for national security at the DOJ. So you probably know the answer to this more than anyone. Is it becoming clear how big the national security implications were to federal agents as they looked through the trove of documents they already knew had been there?
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that is very significant that can't get lost, as people tend to be focusing on will Trump being indicted. It's almost feverish out there in punditry world on opining on that. But regardless of whether he's indicted, not indicted, whether anyone is charged with a crime related to this unlawful retention and unlawful storage of national defense information, we have a serious national security threat right now.
If this type of intelligence is disclosed publicly, it places the national security at risk. And what that means is it places the lives of Americans at risk.
And that's why the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, announced on Friday, actually told Congress in a letter to Congress on Friday, that the intelligence agencies will be commencing, immediately. I'm sure they'd actually already started it, an intelligence review to determine, how damaging to the national security would these be if they get into the hands of those unauthorized to have them. They'll be wanting to determine who has had access to them. Were they stored in places that members of the public or visiting guests to Mar-a-Lago could have had access to? Who has been involved in any of the transfer of documents from the White House to Mar-a-Lago, moving them within Mar-a-Lago? I know at some point DOJ requested surveillance video from Mar-a-Lago. That's in order to see who might have had access, right? They'll be assessing, do we right now have confidential human sources who are in danger because their names are in these documents, and these documents could have fallen into the wrong hands.
This is some of the most sensitive information that the federal government has in its possession. This is the kind of information that involve documents that in many cases you should only look at in a secure location.
The carelessness with which the former president has handled this type of highly classified information is really mind-boggling to anyone who has ever had any role in national security. And that includes all the members, the men and women of our military.
And that is why you talk to Mary McCord when you want to know what might be behind those black lines and what we're looking for going forward. Mary McCord from Georgetown Law. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Next up on Start Here, at what point will loans be left alone? Trust me, this will interest you. We're back in a bit. Going into the weekend, there was actually a bit of optimism surrounding the economy.
Economy's looking good. So far, we're hanging in, and I feel good about it. But we have a long way to go.
Prices, which have been soaring higher and higher, have taken a slight breather. Hiring has been kind of gangbusters, signaling businesses aren't so worried about a recession that they're cutting back yet. And let's not forget, tens of millions of Americans were just told their college debt was either reduced or gone.
Hey, look at this. I'm like free of debt. I'm free of debt. I was yelling.
So yeah, a lot of people have been feeling good. good. But on Friday, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, suggested that all the sacrifices we've had to make to get inflation in check, higher interest rates, tougher loan schedules, maybe a kid putting off college in the first place because their family can't afford it right now, well, those sacrifices are going to have to continue. Interest rates aren't going anywhere. ABC's Alexis Christoforous covers the economy. Alexis, this message seemed to hit everyone like a ton of bricks in the economics world. What was the announcement, though, exactly?
You know, I know it hit them like a ton of bricks and the Dow fell 1,000 points, but I think the Fed has done a great job of telegraphing exactly what they're going to do. I didn't find any real messaging from Fed Chair Powell on Friday.
Restoring price stability will take some time and requires using our tools forcefully to bring demand and supply into better balance.
It's pretty much a foregone conclusion that the Fed is going to raise interest rates at its meeting at the end of September. The question is by how much? Will we get another 0.75 percentage point jump in rates? That would be the third in a row this year. Or will we get a 0.5 point rise?
While higher interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households and businesses. These are the unfortunate costs of reducing inflation.
I think, you know, the Fed has made pretty clear that they're going to remain aggressive and keep raising interest rates. There are 3 more meetings this year, and economists expect the Fed to raise rates at each one of those meetings. You know, he perhaps spoke a little more adamantly about the need to raise interest rates than he has before. But all along, the Fed has made very clear they're going to do whatever they need to do in terms of raising interest rates for as long as they need to, you know, to get inflation under control. We have inflation at 8.5%. The Fed has an inflation target of 2%. So we have a long way to go. And I think the Fed's message has been, and again, Powell reiterated this on Friday, that getting inflation under control is more important than slowing the economy to the point that we dip into a recession, and more important at this point in time than even seeing the unemployment rate rise. Because remember, we've got an unemployment rate at 3.5%, the lowest in half a century. So there's a little wiggle room there to have the unemployment rate rise.
Do you know what's worse than high prices and a strong economy? It's high prices and millions of people out of work. I'm very worried that the Fed is going to tip this economy into recession.
So I think that's maybe what spooked the market, is that, you know, the idea that, wait a minute, the Fed might really just allow us to fall into a recession, allow job losses to start to build to get to their goal of getting inflation under wraps.
Well, yeah, Alexis, we immediately heard from opponents of this decision. The voice we just heard there was Senator Elizabeth Warren on CNN. She says she's frustrated. Like, is there a chance that raising interest rates actually does more harm than good?
That is the question, and it's one that the Fed continues to grapple with. And, you know, Powell talked about what we've seen happen in the past, and that is in the 1970s when we had runaway inflation. And the Fed at the time was sort of in fits and starts when it came to raising interest rates. They raised, then they started to cut rates again, and then they raised rates again. And there was sort of this back and forth, and that did nothing to help get inflation under control. So this Fed wants to try and avoid that. So they think, let's just, you know, take our lumps. Let's keep raising rates now aggressively, even if it means that the economy is going to fall into a recession. So that way we can really beat inflation back. What they don't want to do is sort of have this tug of war with inflation like we saw back in the 1970s. And all along, a number of economists have said the Fed was behind the curve when it came to inflation. At a time when we were in the pandemic and the economy was suffering and the government kept throwing stimulus in the way of checks to Americans, a lot of other countries were not doing that. China, for instance, wasn't handing out any stimulus to its people at that time. And so they did not have to raise interest rates aggressively in the way our Fed is now to get inflation under control. So there is that one sort of, you know, school of thought that, well, if the Fed had moved sooner, to raise interest rates sooner, they wouldn't have to be as aggressive now. And if they had moved sooner, inflation wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. You know, hindsight's 2020. We were in a once in a lifetime pandemic, you know, and our government did what they thought they had to do to keep everybody afloat. But I think, you know, we're all sort of paying the price for that now.
And as you've said before, just real consequences here. Like real life stuff happens when interest rates are at a certain level for many, many Americans. Alexis Christoforous covering the economy. Thank you.
Thank you.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The last time a human stood on the moon, it was nearly full in the Earth's sky.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Since then, there have been more than 600 full moons. In that whole time, since 1972, there have not been a single one of those where you could point up to the sky and say, there is someone walking around up on that thing right now. But soon, that could be changing.
This mission goes with a lot of hopes and dreams of a lot of people. And we now are the Artemis generation.
The U.S. is once again choosing to go to the moon, and the race to get back there could take a giant leap forward today. ABC's Gio Benitez is our transportation correspondent. That doesn't actually do justice to his job. He's our lead space reporter. So, Gio, let's check in with you because it's a big day. What's about to happen here?
Well, I'm still stuck on the 600 moons. I didn't know that.
I looked it up.
You know, it's so interesting because this is the most powerful rocket in the world, and it actually hasn't been tested in flight before. So this is the first time we're going to see this fly, and it's going to take with it a little capsule, the Orion capsule, and that capsule will someday be able to take humans to the moon and then stay there. And that's the whole point here, because a lot of people might be wondering, well, like, why are we going back to the moon? Why are we doing that? We've been there before. But in this case, the whole goal is to establish a home base on the moon, because if you have an interest in exploring deep space, you've got to have another base farther out, not just in our lower Earth orbit, which is where the International Space Station is. You've got to be farther out there. And that's what they plan to do with this, have a base on the moon and have a base orbiting the moon called the Gateway.
And so this mission this morning doesn't have like a human crew on it, right? Like, how does this work? And then I guess when do humans go up there?
Yeah, so basically right now we have mannequins on board. That's what's going to happen, is that you have one called Moonikin, which is what all of the space geeks all across the country named it. And it's going to be wearing a suit and basically testing the radiation, right? Because that's so important. What's the radiation like going through that suit? And then they also have two other mannequins that are actually manufactured to mimic female body organs. And so what's going to happen is when this launches up there, they're going to be able to see, well, how does this affect the human body? Because what they want to do eventually is go without a spacesuit. And so you're not testing it with humans, but you're testing it with, I don't know, humanoid things that are on board to see that it's a safe trip. That's the whole point.
Wow. And so then can you take me forward a few years? Because like assuming today's mission goes well, what are they thinking, the folks at NASA, what are they thinking the moon looks like, I guess, a few years from now?
So 2024, that is when they would launch humans aboard this same capsule, and it would make that same journey.
We're planning to set up a base camp there on the surface of the moon and develop technologies and operational practices that will set us up to go further on to Mars.
And so then, once they're actually on the moon, what they would do is that they're going to be creating this gateway, which is a little sort of orbiting space station around the moon. And that's going to serve as a sort of layover spot, right? If you're taking a trip to the moon, you're going to stop there, and then a little spaceship is going to take you down to the surface of the moon. And eventually, what that would be is that's where you would connect and go to Mars.
So the moon's just a galactic pit stop on our way to Mars.
Absolutely. There's still some science, a lot of science that's going to be happening on the moon, but this is a pit stop.
Wow, and that was my last question to you, Gio, is what does this mean for NASA going forward? Because the last 12 months have been the year of private space flight, right? So does this tell us more about where NASA is going to fit into the bigger picture of space in the next few decades, I guess?
Well, if NASA wins the space race, because it's not just NASA trying to go to the moon, SpaceX is trying to go to the moon.
To make Mars seem possible, make it seem as though it's something that we can do in our lifetimes, and that you can go.
And China is trying to go to the moon, all wanting to go to Mars. So that's all something that's going to be taken into account here is who's going to win this space race. Russia has nothing to do with this one, but now we're talking about one with SpaceX and China. And it's very interesting because Elon Musk has said that he's going to get to the moon first.
That's fascinating. So high stakes here today for the entire space community. And at 8 a.m., if you are listening to this before 8 a.m. Eastern, you should check out ABC News Live, abcnews.com. Gio Benitez will be leading our live coverage of this launch for the Artemis space program from NASA. Gio, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Brad.
And one last thing. If you haven't been chronically online this month, you might be wondering why everyone is so into corn, specifically Corn Kid.
I really like corn.
This is Corn Kid, and he has a name. It's Tariq. But this clip from a web series called Recess Therapy absolutely blew up a few weeks ago because of how delightfully seriously this young man takes the questions.
Can you describe corn to someone who's never tasted it before?
A big lump with knobs.
He's literally munching on a cob during the interview. At one point, he says, "I can't imagine a more beautiful thing." He was nicknamed the CEO of corn. That interview alone has 16 million views on TikTok, but it's nothing compared to what popped off next.
What do you like about corn?
It's corn.
A musical remix of that interview has now racked up more than 50 million views.
I can't imagine a more beautiful thing.
And this is how virality works, right? The interview spawns a song. The song has now spawned spin-off videos from the Tennessee Titans in the NFL, United Airlines, and just anyone who felt like corn deserved an anthem. At this point, people are covering the music remix.
Big lump with knobs, it has the juice.
So the internet is clearly all ears, but as Corn Kid's meme stock rises, some fans are asking if Tariq is being compensated for his contribution.
When I tried it with butter, everything changed.
Other people have certainly recognized this is the moment to cash in. Right now, you can get a baby onesie that says "It's Corn" on it. Recess Therapy monetizes its YouTube channel. The songwriters behind that remix, in fact, have actually turned several memes into smash hits, like this one. The meme star behind the infamous "Hide Your Kids, Hide Your Wife" song said he did indeed get royalties when that remix went mainstream, but also said it catapulted him into fame he was never quite prepared for. Well, last night, in the face of questions about compensation, the musicians posted on YouTube that they're splitting streaming proceeds with Tariq and his family. If that's not enough, Tariq is also offering video greetings on Cameo, little kernels of wisdom, for $140 a pop. Also, I'm not sure anyone involved in the video knew this, but corn has actually been having a terrible year in the real world. Like, there have been storms and supply chain issues, so I bet some corn farmers are actually very psyched about this. More on all these stories at abcnews.com or the ABC News app. I'm Brad Milkey. See you tomorrow.